Today we will build worlds. Nerd Nation. So, one of the funnest things about writing is creating worlds that are so real, individuals want to look up and book a vacation to those worlds. Not all worlds, some of them pretty rough, but it's so real that it feels like it comes off the page. How to build worlds, how to create a setting so real your readers forget they're reading. This is episode 3. Think about the last time a book put you somewhere. You could smell the air. You knew which direction was danger. That wasn't the plot doing that. That was world building. All right, there's two kinds of world building that actually kills stories. A lot of first-time authors, they want to build a world that's so real, they oftentimes make this mistake, right? Because the world building, especially for fantasy, sci-fi, that is just fun, right? I've actually built worlds just for fun that never ever went anywhere. All right, the backdrop problem. Setting is just scenery, it never pushes back. It's just basically bland. The world doesn't affect decisions, mood, or stakes. Could be swapped for any setting and nothing changes, right? There's nothing dynamic about this world. That in itself might not be the biggest problem, but the world can drive a lot of the story. Think of Dune, right? Think of Red Rising. Think of the Way of Kings, the fractured land that they're on. That the dynamic of that world is driving a lot of that story. The encyclopedia problem. Now, this is also a problem that Dune did. Dune, when the writer created Dune, he spent an exorbitant amount of time studying and learning and drafting out all the plants and the creatures of Dune, these desert creatures, which is great. But then he also put a lot of that stuff in the book, and it becomes kind of an encyclopedia, right? And we'll talk a little bit more how to accomplish what he was trying to do, but not make it so beefy that it becomes that encyclopedia problem. Chapter 1 is 3 pages of geography, right? Readers bounce, especially if you aren't a seasoned writer. Readers are just not going to give you a chance. You could have the best book after chapter 4 because you've developed the world. It's great now, it's fantastic. Readers are like, nope, I'm out. Unless it's going to be a big time author where they know that there's going to be some major payoffs. Neither of these is actually world building. One is decoration, the other is homework. All right, core principle. One rule, your setting isn't a stage, it's a force. The world exists to pressure your characters. A desert doesn't just mean sand. Water is politics. Alliances are built around wells. Your protagonist makes a different choice than they would in a forest, right? Another example is Dune. The setting there, the world building builds the politics, right? So there's that really important moment where that individual comes in, he spits on the table, they're all offended, but that was actually a sign of respect. He is sharing his water with them, right? That is a really cool, nuanced situation that wouldn't happen in any other world. All right, so you could have historical worlds. Just think about the 1350s plague era Europe. Dictates who you can trust, how fast news travel, what medicine means. Contemporary, a small town. Geography shapes class, gossip, escape, loyalty. A small town that is poor versus a small town that's rich, or a rich big town, or all these elements create different dynamics and nuances that are specific to your story that will, and this is the ultimate goal, pull your readers in, right? Sci-fi, fantasy, magic system create problems, not solution. If magic can do anything, stakes collapse. So this is a really important element and something that has certainly developed a lot more since Lord of the Rings, right? It's pretty much started that genre, or at least picked it up to a pace where it expanded the readership fantasy genre, where Gandalf was doing magic. We didn't really understand what that magic was. Like I said, he was a pioneer of his time, Tolkien was. But nowadays, that would be a much more difficult magic system to sell. because it's like, well, just use magic. Magic does everything, right? Um, so there's a lot more detailed systems to magic. Magic should have limitations. Doesn't mean that individuals don't want to read and learn about magic. In fact, that can be some of the draw. Think about Harry Potter, where they're learning different spells. In my own series, Nickel Brickleby, there is a ton of magic, and each race has specifically their own magical system, right? Which which was awesome. But now I have so many magical systems in Nickel Brickleby, but it makes for interesting dynamic. The world should make your protagonist's jobs harder, right? If you are on a lush planet, plain with grass and abundance of food, right? It's going to be harder to have those external threats. They're a little bit more difficult. Think about a volcanic planet where you have limited water, you have limited food. Now, I'm not saying you have to be on a volcanic planet. You could have a small town that is riddled with gossip. You do one mistake and you get labeled the rest of your life. You are that person that was known to do X, Y, and Z, right? That is a setting, or that is world building, even though it doesn't seem like it's world building. All right, the iceberg method. Now, this is where Dune struggled, right? Now, Dune was also pioneer, creating a great story, right? Don't hate me on the Dune readers. But there's a lot less Dune readers than there are Dune watchers. A lot more watch the movies versus reading the books, and that tells you a lot about the book. I have read Dune, and this is very true. The writer goes into all this horticulture about the desert planet. Cool for some readers. Most readers, you're going to lose individuals, right? So you want to build 100% of the story. I actually have a bunch of books that I put out called lore books. Acadia's got one. Nickel Brickleby just had one that was released. This goes into depth and detail about all these creatures, the world that I actually built, but I'm only showing in the book series about 10%. Now, a lot of times writers, so I create the 100%, but I'm only showing 10%. So you might be asking, well, why not just create 10% and show that 10%? And you can tell as a reader, you can tell if this world is a cardboard setting, like a Western town that's just cardboard. Even though you can't see through the windows, it's hard to pinpoint how a reader can tell, but they certainly can tell. And there's hints. So I like to create a huge world, but then only show that 10%. All right, this is how Tolkien worked, how Le Guin worked. Readers feel the difference. Only surface what the character notices. A soldier notices escape routes, a merchant notices prices, a child notices smell. POV filters the world. Use it. That also goes to who that character is. If you have an individual that's always noticing escape routes, who's armed, who looks like they can handle themselves, even though you haven't revealed their identity, you're starting to build great characters. All right. Let questions breathe. Not everything needs to be explained. A flag over a building, a name someone won't say out loud, a food nobody eats anymore. Readers will fill the gaps. Let some questions breathe. You don't need to over-explain everything. This isn't a travel brochure. Unless you're writing a travel brochure, you don't need to dictate every great restaurant, food, and flush it out that way. But having some of that nuance in there is going to create that world building. Earn the exposition. Create the question, then answer it. Make the reader need to know something before you tell them. This is another pitfall for early writers. They want to create this world that's so comprehensive, they just throw a dictionary the first 2-3 chapters. It's too much, right? So create the question, then answer it. Once there's a need for that explanation, you can slowly put it into the story. I did this very intentionally with Acadia. The first, call it 7 chapters, we don't see the world from an insider from Acadia. We actually see it from Jessica's point of view, from her perspective. She doesn't know anything about the culture or the people. And that's very intentional because I wanted someone just like a reader stepping in this world for the first time, Jessica stepping in this world for the first time. And I wanted to avoid a lot of exposition of me just saying, well, this is why they do this. This is why they do it. One moment in there, Jessica noticed her caretaker ends up going what they call blind, right? At the time, there isn't a name for it, but later on, we understand that's what happened to that character, hoping that instead of exposition, that pulls the reader in. Discipline, reveal through story, not exposition. Exposition is just basically explaining all this stuff. It is very tempting to do that because you can accomplish exposition in a page and a half versus what it would take you to do good world building in maybe a chapter, right? Exposition is a sign of a beginning author. Now, I'm not saying that all authors don't do it, because sometimes you just need a quick explanation of why that is or why it functions that way. But this goes to a lot more show, don't tell, right? You will pull readers in a lot more with world building and not exposition. 3 things every world needs: rules, what can and can't happen. Some of the best worlds have really funky rules, and the rules don't have to just be the world themselves. They can be social rules, they can be magic rules. There can be a lot of defining factors out there. Rules create stakes. A world without rules is a world without tension. Even realistic fiction has rules: gravity, money, social class, time. History the characters feel. Characters don't explain history, they carry it. A scar, a word they flinch at, a building they don't look at. The past lives in the present, even if the reader never gets a history lesson. And sensory texture. Smell is the most underused sense in fiction. One specific unexpected sensory detail does more work than a paragraph of visual description. What does your world smell like, sound like, 3 a.m.? One of the fun things in when I'm world building is I want readers to step into that world, especially like a seedy gambling location where they have very distinct smells and really rich smells of food one moment and then vomit the next. And you're stepping into this world where it feels very gritty, or a mechanical shop where they're repairing. There's all these different smells of motor oil and things like that. Some of that can really draw a reader in. So a lot of times when you want to draw a reader in, you have more of those details, that nitty gritty, that sensory. And when you want the story to move a little bit more, you push some of those details out, right? You're not going to be explaining the smells of the mechanical shop during an action sequence, right? That's just not going to make any sense. You want to stick to the action. You want the action to move and set the pace. All right, 3 questions. Answer them for your project. So if you're working on a book, here's some 3 questions that you want to do when it comes to world building. What does your world want your protagonist to do? And what does it punish them for doing instead? Now, don't limit yourself to thinking the actual definition of world building, right? It can be societal change, it can be magic systems, it could be a whole host of things. It could be a club, that the club has certain rules. Maybe it's a club that they don't tell you the rules and you have to figure it out yourself. Now, that's an interesting dynamic. Don't steal it, maybe I will. Name one thing the characters take for granted that your reader can't. This is your iceberg. All right. We'll write a single paragraph where the world itself creates an obstacle, not a person, not a plot twist, just the setting pushing back, right? This becomes much easier if it is a society that doesn't let this kind of person do this sort of thing, right? If you can answer those 3, you have a living world. Specificity over completeness. The job isn't to describe a world, it's to make the reader inhabit one, right? You don't need to describe every possible corner element of the world replete, right? You need to bring to life the world that reader is in that moment. The world is a force, not a backdrop. Build more than you show, right? That's the 100% to the 10% iceberg approach. Specificity beats completeness, right? So you want specific elements in that room. You don't need the entire world defined, especially if it's a book 1, right? A lot of this is a slow burn of your world building over time, and that a lot of times keeps it really engaging. If you have the complete world, the first 5 chapters, that's all you do, then Your reader is probably not going to continue on because they feel like they're reading an encyclopedia, but even if they do, now there's no new world elements that you're revealing later down the path. Reveal through character POV, never exposition. Like I said, sometimes you have to do exposition, but exposition should be a last resort. And if you have to do exposition, do it through dialogue, having two people talking back and forth, not this massive monologue where someone just explains why someone just did all this, right? Having some back and forth. And we'll talk about dialogue in the next episode. All right. Thank you all for your support. Please like, subscribe, check out sterlingnixon.com. And here's the question of the day. Have you ever created a setting so real that it itself developed into a story? I've done that. It is very fascinating. I started developing a world. Next thing I know, I had a story that came out of it. That's how real the world was to me at the time. All right, next episode, we're going to talk about dialogue, how to write conversation that reveals, escalates, and crackles with subtext. Like I said before in the first episode, characters are the most important thing I believe in any story, and dialogue is one of the best drivers to reveal who that character is or who those characters are. How every line of dialogue should do at least two things at once, and the one test that reveals when it doesn't. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Until next time.